Hey, everybody. There we go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's edition of our Product Tank meetup. Super excited to be here. There we go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to. So I'm not sure how many people are here already, but we're going to be running this again as our second ever virtual meetup, which is super exciting. And I guess I'm going to run through a quick intro. We have like a super special guest with us today, and we will do a Q&A right after. So yeah, I hope this is fun for everyone. I'm going to get started right away with our typical intro. Just give me a second. All right, so welcome once again to ProductTank Lagos. It's a community for product managers by product managers, just so we can all come together, learn from and share with each other, and collectively, improve our craft. I think ProductTank Lagos started, we're 3 years old now. In April of 2017, we've done an average of 12 meetups so far, and we have like over 3,000 members, which is amazing. Like, thank you guys for everything that you do with us and for us. Today is like a really exciting edition for me, and I'll tell you why in just a moment. So behind the scenes, we have like a number of amazing volunteers that just make everything here work seamlessly. Zainab, Teju, Nifemi, Tosin, Layo, Timitayo. If you guys are here, just like say hi to us in the comment section. And yeah, like just shout out to you for like making all of this come together all the time and just always coming through. So how many people here work as PMs? And if yes, I'm pretty sure you've come across this diagram either in a presentation that you worked on yourself or in reading like tons of blog posts and articles about product management. Yeah. Now, I feel like our speaker for today, Martin, is kind of like one of the OGs in product management. Like he's the one that created that diagram that so many people all over the world have referenced. And today he's going to be talking to us about like how to make better decisions, especially like with respect to aligning your teams. He's going to be sharing his perspectives, I guess some life experiences as well, and some pitfalls to look out for. So I hope we have like our pens and like we're ready to take notes as today goes on. And we'll be right back once he's done to take questions from everybody regarding the presentation. So again, feel free to drop a line in the comment section if you need clarification or if you have a question, and then we'll get to it right after his presentation. I don't think I can do enough justice to Martin's profile, so I'm going to let him introduce himself again when he comes up. And yeah, I think we're just about ready to dive right in. Please follow us on Twitter if you're not doing so already at ProductTankLag, and we will continue to build our community. Awesome. So that's it from me. Martin, are you ready for us?
Yes, I'm ready. Thank you so much for having me, Khadija, and thank you for that amazing introduction as well. It's always a delight to come out to new Product Tanks, and thank you and the team for everything that you guys have done to help build that community around the world.
Thank you. I'm going to hide myself for a bit and just give you the floor. So yeah, over to you.
Thank you very much. So as Khadija said, I want to talk to you about something I call the decision stack, which is really about connecting the dots from vision to action, but so much more than that. So let's dig into it. As she mentioned, my name is Martin Eriksson, but I am sometimes better known as the Big Friendly Giant. I am a giant. You'll have to trust me on the friendly part. And I've been in product management for over 25 years. I built ProductTank together with people like Khadija and Zainab around the world in over 200 cities now. And in that time, I've also been interviewing hundreds and hundreds of product managers and product leaders from all over the world. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because I hear a consistent and common theme from almost every single one that I speak to, which is, how do we know if we're building the right thing? Fundamentally, this comes down to decisions. And as product managers, as designers, you all know that we make decisions every single day, hundreds of them, from the tiniest little thing about a color of a link to the copy that that link needs to have, to the bigger strategic decisions of what bets to make, what hypotheses we want to test, where we want to take our products. And that can lead to overload. So how do we decrease decision overload? And how do we increase the quality and velocity of the decisions that we make? And fundamentally, it comes down to answering three questions. What should we do? Why are we doing that? And how do we want to do it? And that's where my thinking around the decision stack came in, because it's about setting meaningful constraints that actually give you and your team more freedom to make better decisions. And none of this is rocket science. It's just making sure that you have all the elements in place. So you need a strong vision, strategy, objectives, and then whether you call them epics or initiatives or hypotheses, the actual actions and things that you want to go and build. And finally, underpinning it all are the principles that we need to follow. And the important thing about the decision stack is that it's actually made up of decisions. Every single choice that we make eliminates other choices. And that can sound frightening, but it actually means that you have less things you have to consider. It's easier to make decisions the farther down the stack you get, because you've already made the broader decisions of what you don't want to do. It's also important because decisions actually comes from the Latin decidere, which means to cut off. You literally have to make that trade-off decision of what is more important to you. Now, the beauty of the decision stack is that it helps you connect those dots from the top to the bottom, really by allowing you to ask how. How are we going to achieve that vision? Well, here's the strategy that we have. How are we going to achieve that strategy? Well, here are the objectives that we think will get us there. How are we going to do that? Here are the initiatives or the tasks or the epics that we want to build. How do we want to build those? Well, here are the fundamental product principles that we have. But it also helps you answer those questions from bottom up, which is just as important, of why are we doing these things? Why are we building it this way? Well, because we're trying to achieve these objectives. Why are we doing that? To try and achieve this strategy. And that way it really helps us all align from top to bottom and from bottom to top, which is just as important. It's also important because if you have a piece missing, like so many companies do, everything else will fail. It's important to note that this decision stack exists at many levels in your organization. The bigger your company, the more levels you have to this decision stack. Your corporate level will have a decision stack. Each business unit will have a decision stack. Each product will have a decision stack. Maybe even each feature team should have a feature stack. But they all have to line up with each other, or you're going to be just as lost as that giant Jenga block. So that's the theory. How do we actually get about building our own decision stack? Well, like everything else, it starts with why, and asking that question as often as you can. I'll tell you a story from Mind the Product. When we started thinking about formalizing this and started actually hiring people to help us build this community, we realized we hadn't actually written this down. And so we wrote down very quickly in kind of a hasty meeting, oh, this is a vision. This is what we're trying to be, the leading product community in the world. And it sounds great because it has a nice big goal. We want to be leading. It's, a lot of cookie cutter kind of vision statements sound like this, but it isn't actually helping us make decisions. And it isn't actually putting the customer at the center. What does leading even mean? So a few years ago, we got the whole team together and we rethought our vision from the ground up to really think about what is it that we're trying to do. And we came up with this, which is to make product people more successful by coming together to further our craft. And hopefully it resonates somewhat with all of you because you're part of that community. You're those product people that we want to help make more successful. And the point is that we've put that in the center of our vision. We've also taken out everything else. We're not even talking about community. We're not talking about events. We're not talking about training. We're not talking about our website. We're not talking about conferences. We just want to, as a company, make you more successful. And there might be many, many ways that we can do that. Now, vision is so important because it gives you focus. And in a big Harvard Business School study of venture-backed startups, 75% of them fail. And the number one reason that was cited by those founders was a lack of focus, trying to do everything for everyone. But it also motivates you. As Daniel Pink showed in his book, The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us, based on a huge study coming out of MIT, to motivate employees beyond basic tasks, you have to give them autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And purpose is that desire that we have to do something that has meaning and is important. Improving your conversion rate, improving your revenue isn't that exciting. It's a good goal. It's a good company goal to bear in mind. But if you know that that is because you're delivering value to your customer and you're actually making your customer's life better, cheaper, faster, whatever it is that you're doing, that is something that we can all latch onto. And as John Doerr said, who's a famous venture capitalist from Kleiner Perkins, we need missionaries, not mercenaries. Because if you start believing in that mission, in that vision that you have, it's much more motivating than just coming to work for that paycheck. It also starts to help with that alignment piece, which the whole stack is about. And this 2x2 by Henrik Nieberg, who's the agile coach behind the Spotify model, shows how alignment and autonomy kind of go hand in hand. Because if you start at the bottom left with low autonomy and low alignment, you have a micromanaging organization and an indifferent culture. If you move up the alignment scale, you get an authoritative organization where the boss is telling you what to do, how to do it, when to do it. And it's a very conformist culture, no creativity, no autonomy to come up with better solutions. If you instead move up the autonomy scale, it's very classic startup. If any of you are working in a startup, you probably recognize yourself here in that it's very entrepreneurial, it's chaotic, everyone's kind of running in slightly different directions, and you kind of hope somebody's working on the problem. And like any of the consultants in the room know, in a 2x2, you always want to be in the top right corner. High alignment and high autonomy is how you get to an innovative organization and a collaborative culture, where leadership is still setting the direction, but the team is there to figure out how to actually get there. So if you've ever seen one of these cookie cutter kind of vision statements of to be the leading / best provider / supplier of customer focused / market driven solutions, product, services, kind of fill in your blanks, they just don't work because they're not about you and your company and what you're trying to do for your customers. So there is no fill in the blank vision statement. You have to do the work. And a good vision, as we talked about, is customer centric, it's concise and it's clear. It sets an audacious goal. It might not even be achieved in 10 years, 20 years, in your lifetime. It avoids the detail because that's what you're going to figure out later on. Ultimately, it's asking the question, what are you going to do for your customer? Now, a bad vision is company-centric. It doesn't tackle challenges, and it sets you up for a bad strategy. A great heuristic here is to look for words like market leader or being the best or being the top, because they're all about the company and they're not about the customer. Some examples from around the world include IKEA, the furniture company. Our vision is to create a better everyday life for many people. You can see they don't even mention furniture. And that's what's allowed them to move into new spaces like home automation, sound, TVs, even kitchen equipment. Nike's is to bring inspiration and innovation to every athlete in the world. And the asterisk is their own. If you have a body, you are an athlete. Tesla's is to accelerate the world transition to sustainable energy. Kickstarter's is to help bring creative projects to life. And Oxfam is a world without poverty. How motivating would that be to work for? So once you set up your strategy, for me, the next step is actually at the bottom of the stack, and it's thinking about your principles. Because the principles are the things that drive your day-to-day decisions. And as Roy Disney said, the founder of Disney, it's not hard to make decisions when you know what your values are. One of the best examples from my own experience was when I worked at Monster, the job board, in the early 2000s in Europe. And very early on, the CEO and founder put as one of the foremost principles that job seekers come first and recruiters will follow. And as you can imagine, in a marketplace or a platform like that, where you're trying to serve two different audiences, you're constantly torn between what's best for both audiences. And this let us hyper-focus everything that we did, every decision that we made that where there was a trade-off, we went for the job seeker side of it. We would automatically make that decision. We didn't have to argue it. We didn't have to debate it, because that was the principle that we were following. And we knew that by building the best possible job seeker experience, the recruiters would have to come to us because we had the job seekers they needed. Other examples of principles like Google have focus on the user and everything else will follow. Shopify's is to put merchants first. Klarna, which is an e-commerce enablement platform, is that conversion trumps profitability optimization. So whatever you call them, product principles, design principles, values, they need to be a framework for your decision-making. They have to help you with, and your team, with all those tiny decisions that you have to make every single day. They're specific and actionable rules, and they're ultimately a manifestation of your vision, which is why they're so important to get right. One way to think about them is to use even overstatements to really get specific about those trade-offs. So depending on your product or your company, these might be different, but think about conversion even over revenue, or user growth even over revenue, or mobile experience even over desktop. Just by framing the statements this way, you're clearly stating what is more important to you. You might recognize these statements from the Agile Manifesto, where we said things like individuals in interactions over processes and tools. And as the Agile Manifesto said, it doesn't mean that the things on the right are less important. Processes and tools are still important. It just means that individuals and interactions are more important. And any time that we have to make a trade-off between the two, we will side with individuals and interactions. And that's the power that the principles can have for you and your organization. So to create good principles, they make decisions easy. They describe how you actually want to build your product. They're specific to your company, they're easy to remember, and they evolve slowly over time. Bad principles are full of meaningless fluff, like making delightful products. Who doesn't want to make a delightful product? How does that actually help you make a decision? Are you ever actually faced with a trade-off with a delightful product and a shitty product? If you want to help people make decisions, you have to make clearer trade-offs. And ultimately, principles are the best tool that we have to really hit that target of increasing decision velocity and decreasing the conflict and dependencies that often come out of every single decision that we have to make. So now that we've set our vision, we've set our principles, strategy is one of the fundamental pieces that seems to be missing in so many companies. And that's because it's hard. Strategy is really about asking or answering, what are you going to do to achieve your vision? Because vision alone is not enough. Strategy acknowledges the problems and lays out a plan of how to overcome them in order to achieve that vision or mission. As Sun Tzu said, because I always love quoting The Art of War, tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. And strategy comes in many forms. Any of you who've done a business degree or taken a business class or done an MBA will recognize one of these. There seems to be dozens more of them whenever you Google kind of different ways to set out your strategy. And it doesn't really matter what tool you use. It is that you spend the time to think about it and to make sure that you are being strategic. It's thinking about your current situation, the outcome that you're aiming for, the opportunities that you have to leverage in order to achieve those outcomes, and therefore the possible actions that you might take to do that. Digging into that, your situation is all about your customers, your market, and context. Because it's not just about your product, it's how it fits into your customer's life. What are they using next to your product? What is the actual competition for your product? It might be another SaaS provider, it might be another social networking tool, but especially if you're in SaaS, if you're in B2B SaaS, your competition might just be Excel, because you can do so much around task management, project management, billing, everything else that you need out of Excel. So how are you going to be better than that? How are you going to make sure that you fit into your customer's life in a way that makes their life easier, not adding a step or adding more work? But it's also really important to ask, what are the challenges? What is the competition doing? How is behavior changing among our customers or in the marketplace? And therefore, what are the opportunities? How is the market and technology landscape around us shifting? What are the trends? What do we have better than anybody else? In the early 2000s, if you were in e-commerce and you started betting big on mobile, you were laughing because you're getting ahead of that trend and understanding that everything was moving onto mobile. We still see industries today across the world that haven't followed, a digital transformation, that haven't gone online, that don't have any e-commerce. Anybody in that space who is moving in that direction is already understanding where the trend is because it's already moved there. And then finally, it's really thinking about what actions can we take in order to achieve those outcomes. And this is where, as product people, product managers, we should be really good at this. Because fundamentally, as Marty Kagan said, our job is to discover that which is valuable, usable, and feasible. And this is what we do every day. The valuable component's worth hitting on extra, though, because too often people think about that as, profit or revenue and company-focused value. But really, it's about how do you derive value for your customers? Because by doing that, you will build value for your business as well. So an example that I can take is a startup that I worked with last year here in London called Kazoo. And they started by looking at the UK used car market. It's not a sexy market, but selling secondhand cars is a huge business. It's a £100 billion plus business, but it's incredibly highly fragmented. The biggest market share in the UK has 2% of the market. It's still a £1 billion business. It's still a big business, but only 2% of the market share. So you can imagine the long tail of tiny, tiny car dealers all over the UK that it made sense to have around the corner locally somebody with 10 cars on their lot. But that's not the best way to serve customers. It's therefore famous for its poor customer experience. I don't know if it's the same in Nigeria or Lagos, but in most of the world, used car salesman is almost, the worst rating you can give a salesperson. So the opportunity that was presented is that there is this huge market. It's barely penetrated by e-commerce. So I think there was one dealer doing e-commerce with like 10 cars a year, a tiny local guy. And it would take significant capital succeeding because you can imagine buying thousands of cars costs real money. The threats were looking at things like the US companies that were already doing this, looking to expand into Europe. Obviously, some of those big offline businesses in the UK might catch on and start investing in e-commerce. And so the strategy that came out of that was really, how do we build the best possible customer experience around buying a used car, raise enough money to build a big business, and do it quickly? So you can see there's a combination of product things and business things that really set up your strategy. And less than a year later, Kazoo is the fastest growing unicorn in the UK, achieving $1 billion valuation in January this year. And they've done phenomenally well, taking market share and really focusing on how do we build an experience that rethinks used car sales. So they buy the cars, refurbish them, put them on the website, you buy them with your credit card, debit card, or financing, and they will deliver it to you with one of these vans. How much better an experience is that than having to go to a dealer, having 5 or 10 cars to choose from that might not be quite right for you. So it's really because they thought about that strategy and both the opportunities that were presented that they could go after that space. So a good strategy is based on your current reality, and it tackles those challenges by outlining the value that you can deliver to your customers, and it includes coherent actions of what you're actually going to do in order to do that. It emphasizes, therefore, focus over compromise. Being all things to everyone is not going to make you successful. Being the best possible service for this niche market, for this corner, is going to be much more successful. Bad strategy, on the other hand, is full of meaningless fluff. It pretends that there's no challenges, it mistakes goals for strategy, and sets you up for bad strategic objectives. Frankly, too many strategies are just budgets combined with market share projections. They're just kind of drawing that line on the chart of like, if we're here, we want to be there, that's what we're going to do, that's our strategy. But it doesn't actually help you figure out how to get there. Another way to think about strategy is actually as a series of product market fits. As product people, we talk about product market fit a lot, and startups especially, but we forget that it's that first product market fit is not where it ends. Suddenly your product market fit, everything's fantastic. It's a series of product market fits. And that focus especially drives you to think this way, because if you're focused on one market, one segment, one market user, you might start there, one geography, you might start there, and then get product market fit for that segment, and then think about how are you going to expand from there. And mapping it out in something like this, in a spider chart, what your axes are is going to be different for every single company, but it really lets you figure out where you are today. So we've gotten these segments, we have these geographies. What is the logical next step for that geography? What is the logical next step in personas or segments or products that really help you understand how you can get to that next step without having to start from scratch? And also set your plan of where you want to go. It also helps make it increasingly clear what not to do, that the farther out on these scales some of these segments or markets or products are, they're probably not the next highest priority, because you need to do the thing in between before you can get there. Ultimately, strategy is both art and science, and this is why it's so hard, because just like our hypotheses that we use in product, it's an inductive leap that you have to subject to the same logical and empirical tests before you can validate it. And that's why strategy is hard, because the only way to know if you've picked the right strategy is to actually validate it with customers. And I'm not going to go through all the detail here, but obviously this is what Lean Startup, the book, the movement has all been about. It's thinking about strategy in a way that lets you go test whether you're doing the right thing before you are a year or two down the line on that strategy. Making sure that you are moving in the right direction, making sure that you're doing the right thing for your customers. So after your strategy, the next step is to really think about how do you start breaking this down into work that we can do, right? And starting with objectives is a great way to do it. And objectives for me are really about declaring intent, but then giving autonomy to the team. It's for leadership to socialize that strategy and vision with the whole organization and the team, but really to step back and let the team figure out how they can help achieve those goals, those outcomes in their own areas. As George Patton, who's a famous World War II general, said, if you tell people where to go, but not how to get there, you will be amazed at the results. In the old model of command and control, you would have company goals. The company would tell each team what they needed to do. Each team would tell each individual what to do. And at the end of the quarter or the end of the year, whatever your planning period is, you would realize that you've missed your targets. And it's too late to do anything about it. So it doesn't work. In a commitment model, you're still setting that vision, you're still setting that strategy, you're still thinking about your goals, hopefully with the team, as we'll talk about in a moment. But then you actually step back and you let each team go away, think about what is it that they can do, whether it's a product team, a business unit, what can they do in their area, given the knowledge that they have about their customers, given the knowledge about what they're trying to build product-wise, given the knowledge of the user research that they've been doing. What can they do in order to help achieve those goals? And come back with commitments. And pretty quickly you can see, even before your planning period has started, so before that year has started, before the quarter started, you can see whether you have a gap or not. And you can do something about it, because maybe this gap is because Team B isn't being bold enough, or they need some more coaching or training, or they need help to be more ambitious. Or maybe the business needs to rethink what those goals were, or think about a third team or a new business unit in order to achieve them. It helps align both sides of the company. And hopefully many of you are already working with objectives and key results. OKRs are made famous by Intel and then by Google. But it's really important to use them in order to set up the structure. And objectives are all about being qualitative and inspirational. They're time-bound and they're actionable. And then the key results is really measuring those objectives and understanding whether you succeeded or not. And really keeping it to as few metrics as possible helps you keep that focus throughout. So we have to ask ourselves whether we're delivering customer value and business results, what we call outcomes, or whether you're focused on shipping features and hitting metrics, outputs. Because stories, bugs, lines of code are all completely worthless if you don't achieve an outcome. And outcomes, therefore, are meaningful to the business and they're measurable by the team, so they're much better to focus on. But outcomes also have an impact. Thinking further, what impact do your intended outcomes have? How do they change your customers' lives or work? What unintended outcomes might they have? Because as Peter Drucker said, there's nothing quite so useless as doing with great efficiency that which should not be done at all. And I think that's something that we as a tech industry have kind of fallen into over the last 10, 20 years. We've been so focused on Agile and Lean and XP and Scrum and methodologies for developing software that we've forgotten to make sure that we're building the right thing in the first place. And in that race for efficiency, we lose sight of the customer. I'm not saying we should be slow at developing stuff. We obviously still want to be efficient, but it's thinking about what you're building as much as how you're building it. So how does this work in practice? To try and connect the dots, let's look at an example. If you look at Alphabet, which is the parent company to Google, their corporate vision is to make the world around you universally accessible and useful. And if you dig into each of the companies under Alphabet, Google's vision is to make the world's information universally accessible and useful. Nest is to create a home that takes care of the people inside it and the world around it. YouTube's is to give everyone a voice and show them the world. And you can see how each of these visions are unique and individual to those companies, but also tie back up further up the stack to the parent company. So if we dig into Google itself, again, that vision to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. Their strategy at one point, this is a little out of date now, is to leverage the unrivaled store of data to better understand the content and serve the user with fast and accurate results. And some of the objectives they've used to get there include things like improving the call rate so that they can capture more data, improving ranking algorithm to better understand the content, improving speed of search result computation. And as you can see, these all tie back up. And then some of the principles that they've been using over the years and still use today are short, simple, and sweet. Always be fast, always be accurate, and always keep the algorithm secret so people can't game the system. Now, what does this look like for the team? Who's involved in this process? And really, it starts with open leadership, because leadership is still important. Even in an autonomous world where we're giving our teams all the power to make every decision day to day, they can only do that with a strategy and a vision in place, and that's leadership's job. Only leadership has the overview, the insight, the experience to make those intuitive leaps that make good strategy. But everybody in the company owns the outcome. So this can't happen behind closed doors, and everybody has to be involved in the conversation. As Marty Kagan said, again, one of the best people to quote in product, if you're only using your engineers to code, you're only getting half their value. And I would argue that that's the same for all of us. If you're only using your product managers to write stories, you're only getting half their value. If you're only using your designers to push pixels, you're only getting half their value. It's only by bringing everybody together and fully being able to understand the technology capabilities we have, the design constraints and user research insights we have, the business challenge we're trying to overcome, that we can actually find the right strategy and, more importantly, the right objectives and actions that we want to take to achieve it. As Steve Jobs said, it doesn't make sense to hire smart people and then tell them what to do. We hire smart people so they can tell us what to do. So as with most things in products, it's a balancing act, because leadership is obviously heavily involved in setting the vision and the strategy, but involving the team from day one. And then as we get closer and closer to execution, the team takes over more and more ownership, till at one point, leadership has to step away and let the team figure out what they need to do and how they're going to do it. And all of this hinges on great communication. As John Maeda said, clarity comes from not just transparency, but understanding. So it's not just enough to communicate your vision and strategy often. You have to make sure that the team who's behind it, part of it, understands it in their bones so that they can really be missionaries. So to achieve clarity, you literally cannot over-communicate your vision and strategy enough. You can't repeat it often enough. It should be in every quarterly update, every monthly catch-up that we do, just to remind ourselves, what is it that we're trying to achieve? You don't have to spend a lot of time on it every time it comes up, but just to remind us. And when we get to go back to our offices, print it out and put it up on a wall next to you as a constant reminder of what it is that we're trying to go for. And as a constant reference whenever you're having those discussions about doing A or B, which one's going to help us achieve that? An example I'd love to use is the German company called Sing, about to rebrand themselves New Work. They're basically the LinkedIn for the German-speaking world. And they have this concept that they developed called Auftragsklärung. I love it partly because the name's hilarious to me. But really it means mission clarity. And it's a canvas that you see behind these people here that they created together as a team that really sets out how they think about the situation, the complication, the higher intent, the boundaries, the things they've learned, and then the actions they want to take out of it. And it's not really about the specific canvas. You can use a lean canvas, you can use a business model canvas, you can come up with your own. It's that the team did this together, developed this framework together, and created this artifact that everybody now uses, even now that they're remote. But when they were in the office together, they would literally have these big A1 sheets of paper, and they would take them around the office, take them to status update meetings. And it gave everyone a similar framework and a similar language to talk about what they were doing. Starting to get to the wrapping up here, but it's next important to think about the cadence at which these things change. Because as the Agile Manifesto said, we value responding to change over following a plan. And these things are going to change at different rates. That vision is probably 10, 20, 30 years out. It might even be a lifetime away, like Tesla's goal to replace, fixed renewable energy. Your strategy is probably a 2 to 5 year plan, depending on what kind of business you're in. The objectives are annual or quarterly. The epics, initiatives, whatever you want to call them, the things that you're working on are obviously constantly changing. And those principles are somewhere in between. They should be fairly static, but they will evolve over time as you learn new things, as you face new challenges that you need to make decisions on. And ultimately, it comes down to what Jeff Bezos calls being stubborn on the vision, but flexible on the details. Stick to your guns on what it is that you're trying to do long term, but be flexible about how to get there. And thinking about that cadence of improvement, a lot of companies have this like 2019 plan, and then the year goes past, and then we look at the results a couple of months later. And obviously this doesn't work. Hopefully most of you are at least in a quarterly review pattern where you're checking in on that update, making sure that you're on target or not. But think about how often you might want to check in on this. It doesn't have to be a massive meeting, doesn't have to be an all hands, doesn't have to be a full day. But as every, if you're in a sprint, in Scrum, for example, I'm doing sprints, maybe it's every 2 sprints, every 3 sprints. Do you step back and check in and like, oh, are we heading in the right direction? Are we moving towards the right outcomes? Or do we need to rethink what it is that we're doing? Because if you're asking yourself constantly whether you're making progress towards your goals, you might also be asking yourself, what have you learned that might change your strategy? What decisions are you continuously having to make that might make good heuristics for product principles? So to challenge you all, as product leaders, your job is to repeat that mission and vision as often as you humanly can. You're going to get tired of it, but don't forget that not everyone hears every time or reads the email every time. It's up to you to ensure that that full stack is in place so that everyone has this framework to make their decisions within, and to keep telling the stories of how you got here and why this matters to customers. And as product people, it's up to us to use our product skills to help tell those stories and communicate the vision, the mission, and principles. It's up to us to help design better ways of working that helps answer those questions, that helps push us forward. And it's up to us to help feed back all that customer research, the insights, the data that we have into the whole decision stack. And most importantly, keep asking why. Because as Jim Barksdale, who's the CEO of Netscape, said, if we have evidence, let's look at evidence. But if all we have are opinions, let's go with mine. So the only way to convince your boss or your leadership that you're heading in the wrong direction is to bring that evidence, bring the insights, bring the research that you have on your customers or your market. Fundamentally, for both parts, it's really about continuing to ask those questions. So if you're in leadership, ask, how are you going to achieve this vision? How are you going to achieve this strategy so that you really build out the stack? And if you're in a team, ask why. Why are we building this? How is this helping us achieve that vision? Why are we doing the strategy? And together, keep answering questions by using your user research and insight to inform every single step of the stack. So to wrap up, great vision gives us the why, great strategy gives us the what we want to build, and great principles tell us how we want to build them. And when we know those 3 things, we can decrease that decision overload, we can decrease the conflict in our teams, and we can increase the velocity and quality of the decisions that everybody makes in our company. Thank you very much for having me. I'm looking forward to some Q&A. I've put up some books here, and there's a link to the website to find out a bit more. I will make sure that these slides are on that page by tomorrow at the latest. So thank you very much.
This was amazing. Thank you so much, Martin. I feel like there were so many nuggets. I couldn't even keep up, just like jotting down points. So I guess we're going to get this and probably circulate it after this.
Yeah.
I know that people are going to have questions, but I had a couple of questions I wanted to put in front of you before jumping. So my first question is, I know it seems like in an ideal world, just as with most of the examples you gave, the company has like, the vision, the mission all figured out. Everybody gets why they're there. And you come in, you fit into the entire machine as like, a piece that was essentially made for it. But I found that sometimes as product managers, you get into a role in an organization that perhaps doesn't really have their vision or their strategy clearly defined. So you're caught between, I'm not really sure what exactly we're trying to achieve, or it just seems like there's so much we're trying to do and I don't know where to start. And then you're in this position where you're supposed to also determine your own product strategy. So if you find yourself in that position as a product manager, what are some ways you can, I guess, manage that scenario?
I think it really starts with asking that why question, right? Like, why are we doing this? How does this, what are we trying to achieve? Why is this our strategy? Why does that work? And it's almost being that uncomfortable person that kind of asks all the awkward questions, right? Because otherwise you're not going to have the conversation. And it's kind of challenging your own leadership, not in a like confrontational or aggressive way, but it's challenging them to be able to answer those questions. And if you want kind of extra brownie points in my world, then it's thinking about how can you bring some of that thinking to them already and be like, why are we doing this? Given what I understand of our strategy of trying to achieve this, we could look at these options. Why are we not considering those options? What are the trade-offs that we've made to, the more data you can bring, the more ideas and options that you can bring, the more clearly you will show to the rest of the company that clarity isn't there and that you need that clarity in order to make better decisions and be able to build the right product. And I think it's having that back and forth conversation. It's not a like ask once, it's a constant conversation of like, oh, why are we trying to build this? Oh, if that's our strategy, what about this and this? How did we make those decisions? Wouldn't it be better to consider this? Because look, I've looked at this market segment data and we could get much better penetration over here or convert. Like, it's being able to bring that data to the table that really changes the conversation from an opinion battle, which is what I was trying to get to with the Jane Barksdale quote, and make it something about facts and make it about data and make it about evidence. And the more you do that, the less that you're kind of challenging them as individuals, the more you're challenging the idea and the thinking, and together you're going to work out how to write a better one. And I think, especially in a bigger organization where everything might be broken, it's kind of start small as well, right? It's like, maybe don't go straight to the CEO and be like, hey, where's my vision? And like have an argument about why the vision doesn't work for you. Like, start with your team and make sure the team understands, like agrees and thinks about what you're trying to do. Then like go to your boss and see if that kind of thinking might help your boss and might help the other teams around you, and kind of start small and move outward that way. It's like peeling the layers of the onion, right? As opposed to kind of going straight to the top, because that might be a little too confrontational for your career health, right?
That's helpful to hear. Thank you. And I think that makes sense as well. Like, you start small and then over time you might even build out your own perception of what the strategy should be.
Yeah.
Potentially in shopping that around, it's either people rally around or they actually are forced to think about it. And
I think that's why the stack for me works so well, because it can work in a team as well. Like, yes, it should be at a company level, but it's not. If it's not, as product managers, we can ensure that our own little team, like even if it's just you and the designer, the two engineers, if that's your team, like make sure you guys are thinking about it. Make sure you are thinking about what is, maybe you're not setting a big audacious vision, but like, how are we thinking about this strategically? How are we thinking about our goals? How do we want to do this? What are the principles that we want to work towards, right? In order to achieve that. And I think just sometimes that can help as well, because you're kind of showing, not telling. So you're not kind of challenging the boss, but you're showing the boss that, hey, this is a better way of working because everyone knows what they need to do. We spend less time in meetings and debates about what we should be doing, and we're kind of super focused. So that can be another way to think about it, of like, how do you start small, but also how do you just start in your own team or with your immediate group, not kind of challenging the whole organization from day one.
Exactly. Okay. Fair enough. Thank you. My second question is a bit more hypothetical. So it sounds like everything you talked about is the reasonable thing to do. You come in, you try to figure out why everyone is here. The team is rallied around a particular vision or objective, and everybody just like works towards it. You have periodic checkpoints within which you look back to say, are we on track? Are we doing what we should? You're asking all these questions, right? So I guess it got me thinking, like, well, why isn't this everybody's reality every day? And since you've spent like quite a lot of time in this space, I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on why this doesn't always work the way it should or the way we expect it to.
Fundamentally, why it doesn't work is because it's hard, right? Like setting a good strategy, setting a good vision, it's hard work. And because of that, we often get stuck into like the day-to-day, right? And especially in a bigger company or an established company, you already kind of like, we're moving along. We kind of know our customers quite well. We want to like move into this area or do this thing. And the day-to-day kind of takes over, right? Even in a startup, there's not enough people to kind of go, oh, well, let's spend a week thinking about this. Like, you just don't have the time. So I think that's the why. And I think it's important to note, like, this is the classic thing, and I'm sure you have this with other speakers, of like, this is the perfect theoretical world that we should all, try to strive to work in and live in. And obviously, it's important to know what that might look like, but it's also important to realize that in reality, most companies don't have all of these pieces in place. And it can kind of work okay anyway, but the more you can think about any of these things, the better it will be. And I think the most important ones for me are really the vision and the principles piece. And I think the principles is what I see missing in most companies, because if you can set good principles, even if it's not helping you at that strategy and vision level, even if it's only at the team level, it really helps you with those day-to-day decisions. Like I said, with that platform example from Monster, just having that kind of written out as a statement of like, we care about job seekers more than recruiters. Doesn't mean we don't care about recruiters, but job seekers come first. You can imagine how often that trade-off conversation came up, right? Of like, we can do this feature this way or this way. And it's like, well, let's go the job seeker way because that is our principle. And it just cut out that debate. And you also, through doing that, start buying yourself more time to have those bigger conversations. So fundamentally, I think it's just because it's hard, right? Like that's why it's easier to be like, oh yeah, we're going to go in that direction. That seems to make sense. Let's just start building some stuff, right? It's so much easier to do that than to really spend the time to go through a strategy. I mean, this is why, I haven't invented the concepts of strategy or vision or anything, but like that's why there's so many books and so many things written about this, is trying to help us understand how to do that. And so I would sort of say that, yes, in theory, all of these pieces need to be in place. And in theory, even like the companies that do it well have all these pieces in place. But of course they break down sometimes. Of course they're not missing. Of course they set a strategy and then a month later they have to do something completely different. That's the reality. And that's also why we need to be adaptive to it and understand that those things are going to change. Even if you have hopefully your vision changes very rarely, but your strategy might be 2 to 5 years out. But I'm pretty sure everybody on this call, your strategy got thrown out the window at the beginning of 2020 with a global pandemic, right? Mind the Product had to do that. We were almost 100% funded by the conferences that we ran. Guess what? Can't run conferences this year. We've had to cancel all of our 5 of our conferences. And so we had to throw out our strategy basically at the beginning of the year and rethink how can we do what we need to do in order to achieve that vision. And the vision hasn't changed. It's still helping product people be more successful, but how we do that has changed. And I think that's where we can also get too painted into a corner of like, oh, well, we have our 5-year strategy and our 5-year plan. We can't deviate from it. And really that's where having the whole stack actually helps you understand that like, oh, this has had to change. Does that mean this has to change? Oh, they're not connected anymore. How do we make sure that they connect? So I hope that helped. But I think it's understanding that in reality, no one's going to have all of this perfectly set out. So it's up to us product leaders to really push the conversation, I think, to make sure that that happens and that we get closer to having all those pieces in place.
Mm-hmm. That's very helpful. Thank you. Thank you for that. I'm going to put a lid on my questions now so we can take a couple from the comment section. The first one from Visaya. Oh, hey, Visaya. The first question is, how do you convince the management team to adopt a vision and strategy for a product that's not yet launched?
I think it's...
I guess it would be in line. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I think it's a fundamental thing of, whether you're a startup or whether you're starting a new product in an enterprise company, this is your opportunity to get it right, right? To the earlier question of like, oh, we have all these pieces missing. Well, if we're starting from scratch, why didn't we think about how to do that? And I think to start from scratch, whatever decision it was that took you to the point where you said, oh, well, we're going to launch this new product, is the strategy. Like maybe you haven't articulated it as such, but maybe it's worth kind of taking, some time. It doesn't have to be a lot of time to go back and think about, why are we trying to do this? Like literally asking that why question again. Why are we trying to do this? Oh, in order to achieve this. Okay, so maybe that's a strategy. Let's start with that. And again, especially when you're starting a brand new product or a brand new company, that strategy is a hypothesis, right? It's not set in stone. You're not going like, oh, we're doing this because that new market is fundamental to our future. Like, we think there might be value here. Great, that's the strategy to start with. And then as you start learning things and as you start moving into that new product area, you can go back and refine the strategy. The newer, I should actually put this in because I think the newer your product or the newer your company is, the shorter those timeframes need to be, right? Your vision, mission, probably still pretty long-term, but that strategy and goals, you need to be really short. And that is what's going to force you to go learn more about what it is that you're trying to do and make sure that you're actually solving customer problems and can help achieve that. And that's where I think a strategy, it's great to have, even if it's, written in pencil, basically, that set up a strategy and figure out how to get started. Doesn't mean that you won't change it again in 3 months or 6 months as you start learning stuff and actually start building stuff and understanding whether this thing is helping build value or not. And that's where, again, that can help because you don't have to get stuck into this for the next 5 years. You can, after 3 months, might realize that actually there is no value here. So it doesn't, we don't have to spend more time thinking about strategy because this was the wrong move. Let's look at a new opportunity or something else. So I think it's starting with that question of asking why and why are we doing this, trying to get to some kind of overarching company goal, at least to be that first kind of written in pencil strategy that you set. And then as you start building a new product or a new feature, think about how you can start making sure that all these steps are in place and start evolving again much quicker in the early days so that you have that structure in place and can align the whole team around it.
Okay. Thank you. I think that is a very concise answer to Busaya's question. We'll take the next one from Nifemi. And I think this was coming from when we were talking about how to get the company to rally around some sort of strategy where one didn't already exist. And the question is, in a situation where you're not in a position to influence the alignment of those teams as a junior PM, how do you do that? How do you get the CEO or the team leads to get to the point where there's actually something articulated that you can work with?
Yeah. And I think it goes back to that point really about starting small, right? And I think it's asking, the junior PM can still ask, why are we doing this, right? You can still ask like, okay, I'm going to go write these stories. Why are we doing these? Like what goal are they attached to? Oh, we haven't set a goal. Okay, why don't we have a goal? Like you can be that, annoying little brother, annoying little sister that asks the why question 5 times, right? And I think even if you're not always going to get the answer, and even if after one you're like, oh, the boss doesn't seem happy about this, I'm not going to ask the second one. Like you can start thinking about that conversation and you can start pushing that conversation. And then you can, I think look to your peers, right? So look to your other product managers, product leaders, because they're probably caring as much about this as you are and also frustrated that they don't have those answers, and work with them. And this includes, our fellow designers and engineers. Work with them to figure out, how can we make this clearer? Is this clear to you? Is this not clear to you? So that you can go almost as a team and be clear that like, oh, this isn't clear for us. Why are we doing this? Can we set some structure in place? Can we set some OKRs so we know whether being successful or not? I think it's, no matter how junior you are, I understand it's super scary. Like I've been there myself, to ask those questions and be that awkward person, but it's the only way to start making change happen. From the most junior to the most senior person is to start with those small questions and those small movements really. So really, I think just take heart and maybe find an ally. Maybe that's another good way to think about it, as that really junior person, is find, whether it's a product manager next to you, a designer next to you, somebody else in the company, so you feel like you're not the only one asking the awkward question. And that'll help you guys both kind of start moving towards having the whole company start asking that, right?
Awesome. Thank you. The next one is from Faye. Hi, Faye. And the question is, how would you think about setting the principles for companies with multiple product lines? And more specifically, would that be more effective on an organization level or on a per team or per product level?
So this is where I talk about that decision inception slide, right? Where like each level of the company has a full stack. So each level of the company has their own principles. So at the corporate level, you do have, strategy, vision, everything, but you also have principles. And at the corporate level, Monster might have, I think, let's use Monster as a good example here, just to kind of, go full circle. So obviously Monster was a big company. We had, as a company company principle was that job seekers came first, recruiters kind of will follow. But obviously there were recruiter teams, right? There were product teams that were solely focused on building recruiter features and ATS tools and things like that. And obviously their principle didn't necessarily mention that as much as it referred back to the company level, right? So as part of the recruiter team, it's not that they were second-class citizens or they weren't as important, right? They were still focused on building the best possible applicant tracking system or whatever for their recruiter clients. But they also had in their mind that at the corporate level, we care about job seekers. So let's make sure that that's not, when we do that, we're not invading people's privacy, that we're not doing things in a way that might piss off that end job seeker, right? So it's important to think about how these principles change at different levels of the organization, but still tie to each other. Obviously, the job seeker team then would be like 100% job seekers. It's like, we don't care about recruiters almost, right? Because that was the company level principle, let them do that. And it was almost like every feature that we build, if it's not helping job seekers, it's not a priority. Again, it doesn't mean that you're ignoring recruiters or pissing them off, but it's always taking that priority side. And that's why it's so important to think about that stack at every level of the organization, because you need those pieces in place for each team to understand how they're helping each other as a team, but also how they're fitting up to the overall goals. And it's also important to keep everybody aligned. So even the job seeking recruiter team, they're not, fighting each other. They're in parallel, moving towards the same goal. So yeah, I think it's thinking about, especially with principles, how they might separate from teams, and depending on your company organization, they might look pretty similar a few levels down, and then you get into that like recruiter versus job seeker team, and they might look quite different because they're going after different goals.
All right, that's clear. So as per staff, if that makes sense, but all still aligning towards the overall objective.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
And that's the trick. That's the other part that makes this tricky, right? Is like, how do we have things that make sense for that recruiter team to make them make sure they know that their work is important. It's, taking care of the recruiters is important, while also living up to that overarching company principle of caring about the job seeker, right? And that's why it's a constant communication piece. It's a constant balancing act. It's not, none of these things that we've talked about today are, written in stone. They're not like put up like the 10 commandments or something and put up on the wall and never touched again, right? It's a conversation back and forth. And if the recruiter team feels like, oh, that principle doesn't quite work for us, how can we tweak it? They should have the autonomy and be empowered to make that change for themselves, but also they can have that conversation around, oh, this doesn't quite work. How do we make sure that this principle, works for the work that we need to do, while still maintaining some sense of like, how do we, and it was easy stuff for them around like, oh, well, of course, we still want job seekers to know that we're taking care of their privacy and their data security. We still want to make sure that, we're not giving reports to recruiters about how often a job seeker has looked at my job ad because that might look desperate. And, it's finding those things that are the right balance between serving your customer while still living up to that principle, right?
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Okay, thank you. I have lots of more questions. So I'll take the next one from Timmy. And the question is, how do you build a strategy when you know you want to play in a market, but you're not exactly sure how? For example, a company knows it needs to be digital because of everything that's happening in the world, but you don't even know where to start.
I think that's, going back to those very basics, like a SWOT analysis or something similar is really, really a powerful tool if you use it well. And that's really the example that I used of that used car marketplace, right? Where they weren't an existing company, but they kind of looked at this market and was like, oh, this is a completely offline market. There's nobody really doing e-commerce or digital in this space. What are the opportunities that allows, right? By going digital, what does that mean? Does that mean better customer experience? Does that mean, lower cost? Does it mean faster delivery or service? What are the unique things that going digital, because it can't just be a buzzword sometimes, but like, what are the things that actually lets you do for that market? And in that analysis, you can then come up with a strategy to understand that, like, oh, there is an opportunity here because nobody's serving this market, which means there's a terrible user experience. By just doing some digital first things about building a simple e-commerce website to sell cars on, we can actually, 10x that user experience very easily. And therefore it's a market worth going into and investing in, even if it's you as a company pivoting your own business, right? And I think that's why, we can get very stuck on the sexy kind of digital product and design and like, oh, let's build this cool thing or build an app, and like, but you kind of have to start the step before that of like, what are you actually trying to do? How does this help you or your business deliver more value to your customers? It's, again, better experience, better speed, lower cost. What are the fundamental things that you're solving for the customer better by doing it through a digital product? And that will then unlock the strategy that you need in order to get there, right? Because that's what's going to answer that question of, okay, there is an opportunity there, there is value there. What are the things that we need to do to unlock that value?
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. I'll take this next one from Damilola, and it's pretty straightforward. It just says, is it advisable to be flexible with your strategy in a situation where the insights you worked with before changes over time?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is where I think I've actually learned something today that I need to put back in the deck. This is, we're always learning. These things are always iterating. So I think there is something around that cadence of like the longer the product or company has been around, the longer that cadence can be, right? So how often you change your vision, your strategy can be, the longer you've been around, the longer that strategy is going to be. Because you have a pretty good sense of like, okay, we know the market, we know the product, we know we need to head in that direction. We're making big investments in sales forces and things like that. So it can be a longer term. You can have a 5-year plan if you've been around for 15, 20 years or more. You can't have a 5-year plan if you literally just started your company, right? So you can try to set one of like, oh, strategically, we think we need to go in this direction. But as Damilola points out, that's going to change because you're going to learn stuff, right? You're going to go talk to customers. You're going to go talk to prospects. You're going to build something that's going to fail horribly. You're going to learn what didn't work. You're going to figure out something new that worked. And so definitely, I think there is an understanding. And I think, again, this is where we as product people, designers, engineers can bring that agile mindset of like, again, nothing's written in stone. How can we be adaptive? How can we respond to change over following a plan? Because the strategy is still your best guess, right? It is a hypothesis. You're trying to figure out where do we want to be in 5 years. That might change in a month. That might change, in a week because COVID happens and suddenly there's a pandemic and you have to completely rethink your business. Or it might change in 2 years because you learned something new or you launched something that didn't work quite the way you thought. So I think other than the vision that you kind of want to try and leave alone and be really stubborn about trying to achieve, and that's why it needs to be very high level and very aspirational. Everything below that can change at the drop of a hat if you come up with better data to have a better strategy or a better objective or a better goal in mind.
There was a follow-up here about like how to tell when to change your strategy, and I think you've answered that as well. So depending on the outcome of each experiment you carry out, you'll go back to the drawing board if it didn't work and try to figure out why, and then change.
And that's why that OKR structure is so good, right? Because you're setting your objective and you're setting how you're going to measure whether you're successful or not. And very quickly you'll find out at the end of a quarter or a year, or if it's a new product, right? You might just set an OKR for the product and let's figure this out in 2 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever the time frame you set on it. You're going to very quickly realize, oh, this isn't moving those metrics in the direction we need to in order to hit the goals. What are we doing wrong? And then you can, it might just be the product that you're building isn't quite right, and you rethink at that point. Or you might realize that you have to step back because you've learned some new stuff that actually the goals weren't right. So how do we want to rethink that? All the way up, again, that stack, right, to strategy, hopefully not vision, but even up to vision if you need to, of like, oh, this isn't working the way we thought. But actually in doing this, we've learned that there's an opportunity over here. We should go do that. And that's the famous pivot, right? There's famous companies that have, set out to build something completely different and then found success with some weird thing that they built on the side. Slack is one of the best examples, right? They were building a gaming company. They were literally designing a game. And this is like, I think it's the second time it's happened to the founder, because he did the same with Flickr when they founded Flickr. They were trying to design a game, and then they realized that they wanted to be able to upload photos of people, like screenshots and stuff from the game. So they built Flickr, and that became like, one of the early successes of the internet. came back to, launched Slack as a, well, I think it's called something different, as a game, built this internal messaging tool because they needed to be able to work better together. And then they realized that that was the opportunity, right? So I think it's having that flexibility to always think about, are we actually achieving the goals that we want to do? Are we achieving the outcomes that we want to do? Are we helping our customers the way we want to do? And if not, what do we need to rethink to do that?
Exactly. Yeah. This next one is from Adeyinka, and the question is the funny one. The question is, for how long should you as a PM put up with anti-agile leadership? I'm not even sure what that means. Knowing fully well that ideally working with PM practices like this should, I guess, eventually help you get better over time.
Yeah, I think it is something that I get a lot, right? Especially going back to that, like the junior, or even like a product manager or product director, like whatever level you're at some point you go to a company, or the company that you're in evolves to a point where you're just frustrated, right? You can't get these changes through. You can't get a conversation about strategy and vision through. You can't get, agile thinking in place. And really the answer of like how long you should put up with that is individual, right? It's like, do you feel like it is moving? So this is literally the coaching advice I've given to many, many people, many friends in this situation, is like, do you feel like it's moving in the right direction? Do you feel like you can go ask the why question and that got a little bit better, and like that you got a little bit better result and a little more clear objectives and goals? Or do you feel like you're literally hitting your head against a brick wall every single day? And if it's the latter, you have to set your own time frame, whether it's 3 months, 6 months, a year, whatever it is. Like, how much pain do you want to put up with trying to make that change happen before you try and get out? Obviously, everybody's situation is different. Job market can be different. So it depends on your ability, you think, of finding another job. All of those things I understand is going to be different for everybody. But if you feel like you're getting a little like inch by inch change happening, and you feel like you're motivated by what you're trying to build, even if there isn't a set vision, like maybe in your head you have an idea of what that vision is, of like, oh yeah, I know we're just selling used cars online, but really, like, my vision is like we're trying to help these people save time and save money by buying a better car. And then overall, Kazoo has this thing around, but if we become a market leader, we can actually direct people to cars that are better for them and the environment, while costing less than they think, things like that. If you can see those things in front of you somewhere in the dark, distant future, and you feel like you're making inch by inch movements towards that, it might be worth sticking around and trying to make that change happen. And that's why, as with most product things, I've actually written a blog post about this. The answer is it depends, right? It depends on your personal circumstances. It depends on, I think most importantly, whether you see any change happening. And when I've advised friends about this, it's been that, it's like, how comfortable are you? Should we set a time frame of like 3 months, 9 months, whatever it is? Let's try get these 3 things fixed. Like, and it doesn't have to be the giant things, it doesn't have to be big things, just 3 little things around how you're working, how you're setting your goals, how you're thinking agile, being able to bring user research in to change people's mind. And if you can't achieve those 2 or 3 things in that time frame that you set, maybe then it's time to start looking for other opportunities.
I know people usually don't like to hear that last line, but yeah, like everybody has a breaking point, right? There's a limit to everything. So yeah, if it's not working, then it's not working.
Yeah. And that's, it's so personal, right? I've been in a situation where a good friend of mine was the CTO and I was the head of product on an interim basis. And we were facing this challenge, right? And it was like a really slow, like, change management piece. And we were like really fighting to make every change happen. And because I was interim, right, I was a mercenary, right? I didn't have that long-term vision. I didn't have that long-term motivation. So I was like, I can't do this. Like, after 6 months, I was like, I'm out, like, cut the cord, like, let me out of here. He'd been hired full-time. He was a CTO. He had some stock. He had a long-term vision. He knew that, like, he had something to look forward to, and he saw that inch by inch interaction. And so he stayed there for 5 or 6 years and made the change happen. Like, it took a long time, but that organization has completely changed how they do the work. So it really does depend on your personal circumstances and your personal, tolerance for pain as much as anything else.
Wow, interesting. Josh says, how often do PMs not realize that their ability to push organizations to adopt strategies is due to a lack of soft skills as opposed to a lack of, clear planning and good use of data?
I think that's a great point, right? And it's something we don't talk enough about as in product of, soft skills are kind of a misnomer, right? It sounds like they're soft and fluffy and easy, but it's actually the hardest skills, right? Technical skills are so easy to pick up. You can figure out how to write a user story, do a roadmap, do prioritization. Those are technical, simple, not simple, but they're easy enough to learn. You can pick those up. But those soft skills, right? Working with people, influencing without authority, like that is the fundamental thing about product, where we have all the authority, all the responsibility, but none of the authority, right? And that's why it's so important to leverage those skills. And I think that's the thing that you learn over time. And it takes longer to understand how to leverage those tools of influence. How do you ask the question the right way? How do you ask why just enough times to make the change happen, but not enough times to annoy your boss? How do you start bringing data and evidence to that conversation? How do you start influencing by showing that even in your team, this way of working can work better, and using that influence then to build out to the rest of the team? Because ultimately, the proof is in the pudding, as the Brits say, right? Of like, if you can show that working this way gets you better results, if you're the team that's consistently like beating outcomes, achieving good things, getting great customer satisfaction scores or NPS scores, everyone else is going to be like, hey, why are they so different? What's working over there? And it's like, oh, well, hey, let's come have a conversation. It's because of these things, right? And that can be tough on the very junior level, but if you're a product manager for a team, or you own a product or a feature area, you can make that change happen with your designer, with your engineers, and you can show that it is a better way of working. So I completely agree, Joss. I'm not sure I answered the question, but I completely agree that it's almost more important for us than to learn like a technical strategy, or to really go learn how to write a good strategy, is to just use our influence skills and learn how to develop those and use those to the best of our abilities in order to start making that change happen.
Thanks, Martin. I think we have just 2 more questions, and then you'll get a breather. The next one is from Ty. Hey, and he says, as a product owner, what can you do, or how much control do you really have when what you're managing is heavily dependent on some much needed fundamental changes that are beyond your team and beyond your product?
I think this is a pretty classic example, right? And I think whether it's that kind of big fundamental change, or the other common use case you see or challenge that you see is teams that have a dependency on like a platform team, right? So like, oh, great, I need to build this, but in order to build the thing I need to wait for the API team or the platform team to like build the API for me. And depending on where you are in the organization, slightly different advice, right? I think if you are a product leader, it's up to you to make sure that those dependencies are not a problem. And one way to think about that as a leader is to make sure that those requests are pull requests, not push requests. So to explain that, let's say you are a feature team and have to wait for an API team. In a traditional world, you would basically go, yep, I need this API call. You would go talk to the API team. They're like, okay, I get it. It makes sense. In our priority, it's number 4 or 5, so we'll get to it in 6 months. And then like the feature team has to wait 6 months for that API to be in place. That's the push method, right? Because you're waiting for the API team to actually do the work. The pull methods is kind of flipping that on its head and going, this is a priority for us. We need to build an API to do this in order to achieve our objectives. We're actually going to do the work. We're going to go talk to the API team, make sure that we're designing it the right way, that we are following the code standards and things that they want, and not stepping on toes or breaking something. But we're actually going to pull the actual work, the development work, design work into our team to make sure it happens in the priority order that matters to us. And I think it's the same with a digital transformation type of scenario of like, obviously as a leader, you can make that happen. If you're just a product owner or a product manager in one of those teams, the way to make it work is almost to like, well, I can't do anything until these guys are done. Maybe like the next priority for us is to just help and get that work done, right? Pull that work into your team and show that you are thinking about company level goals as well as your own team goals. And that's what can also help start that conversation. I think one of the biggest things that I coach product managers on to show leadership skills, to show that they're ready to be a senior product manager, or director, or VP, is to show that whole company thinking. It's not just like, oh, what do I need to do for my team and my thing? Oh, in order to achieve that, that team needs to do their thing. And if that's still the highest priority, go work with that team to make sure that happens. Don't go like, oh, I'm going to go to my second highest priority because I can do that without the team, but that's kind of not the best outcome for the whole company. So again, I think putting you in a difficult situation, probably, of having to have that uncomfortable conversation of like, well, in order to achieve that highest priority, this has to get done. And if that is the highest priority for the company, why doesn't my whole team go work on that with them for the next 6 weeks until it's done? And then we can go back and build the thing that we need to do, because that is the most valuable outcome for the company. And again, you can show that you're thinking about the value, you're showing about thinking about those objectives, you're showing that you're thinking about the strategy that you're trying to achieve. It might not be, it might be that, oh, if that's going to take 6 weeks, actually our second most important thing is more valuable to give impact sooner. But in many cases, that is the outcome, is that you're going to have to go help that team, or, you know, sit your team out while they go work on that other feature that you need.
I think the major takeaway for me there is, don't feel like you should leave that item and go to something else simply because I guess there's a blocker, you know, like just double down and make it happen if it's really the most important thing you should be doing. Yeah.
And as leaders, think about how you minimize the dependencies, right? So that the teams aren't like, oh, well, I can't do this thing because I'm waiting on another team. Like that's death for this kind of organization that we want to try and build, right? And that's why, you know, and it's easier, the more modern your tech stack is, and all these like microservices and all these things obviously make that easier. If you're building a big monolith, it can be harder to have those dependencies decoupled. But that's something that we really need to work with as product leaders, together with our tech leaders, to make sure that, you know, their technical dependencies are minimized so that the teams can go do whatever they need to do in order to achieve their outcomes.
Thank you. I think we'll take Abraham's question. And this is funny because it resonates with a number of people. Like, what do you do when nothing seems to work and the teams are just not coming together the way you've read that they would when you did a number of things?
Again, I think, you know, these things take time, right? And it can be frustrating when you come into a new team, or, you know, you promoted that, like, oh, I'm making these changes and like it's not moving quickly. And it's going back to that soft skills point, right? Influencing people, changing people's mind, changing how people think about work takes time, right? It's also realizing that not everybody's necessarily motivated by this kind of work. You might have engineers on your team that really just care about writing good code and want to go home at 5 p.m. Like, that's also fine. But as the product leaders, it's up to us to understand like what motivates each individual on that team. I think it's really just, for this one, it's really just don't give up. Like, keep thinking about, oh, if I didn't get that point across, or they seem to be, you know, we talked about the strategy, we talked about the goals and objectives, but they seem to be veering off. Like, go ask the questions why. Like, this is where the leader's job changes from, again, that old model of being very command and control and very, you know, micromanaging, of like going and telling each individual what they need to do. And it becomes much more of a coaching role. And it's much more about coaching each individual on our team of like, oh, wait, when you made that decision that seemed to go against the objectives that we talked about, you know, a month ago, why did you make that decision? How did you come to that? What is and again, they might have evidence to show why that was a good idea that you don't know about. But even if they don't, it gives you that opportunity to go back to that conversation and keep reaffirming things back to the decision stack, to your goals, to your objectives, to your strategy, and reinforcing that that's the thing that we need to be working on. And then if they learn something new that pulls them away from that, that's something that needs to be brought to the whole team to learn from, not a reason to kind of just go veering off in another direction. And really, I think it comes down to that clarity point, right, around communication. It's not enough to say that this is a strategy and here's the objectives. It's really important to work through that with the team, to either develop it together with them, or at least when you're presenting it to them, kind of really walk them through why you've made those decisions, the trade-off decisions that you've made along the way, or they're going to go through the same journey on their own afterwards, and you're going to be frustrated that they're not kind of heading in the same direction. So you have to, like good designers, we have to show our work as well. So even if you're just presenting like top down, like here's a strategy and what we're doing, you have to explain why that is the strategy. Why did you decide on that? What is it that you're trying to achieve? So that you really achieve that clarity. So it's not just about transparency, it is about clarity and making sure that everyone understands why you're doing what you're doing. Because that's the constant reminder that like, oh yeah, okay, we need to actually do this, not that, because that's going to focus us back on what we're trying to do in the first place.
Thanks, Martin. Final question for today from somebody called Product Videos. And he or she says, as a product manager, how much should we be influenced by customer feedback? Yeah.
So I think it's a semantics question, right? So we're really getting into like, what do we mean by influenced by the customer? So I think obviously everything that we do should be in service of the customer, and it should be influenced by what we learn about the customer, what their needs are, what they find valuable and not valuable, what's working for them and what's not working for them. The trap too many people fall into is that means asking the customer what they want, right? That's not the way to go about it, because if you ask the customer what they want, they won't really know how to articulate it. They might go, oh, it would be nice if this feature existed, but then you actually sat down next to them and watched them working, you realize they don't actually need that feature. They need one other thing, and it was already, you know, whatever it is, there's a difference between following what your customer tells you to do, or you ask them what they want, and there's being influenced by what you understand about your customer. And that is a fine line to walk, but once you start doing that, you realize that like, oh yeah, sure, I can have a conversation about what does the customer want. But the most valuable insight I'm going to have is actually sitting next to them while they're working and looking at how they're doing things, and like, oh wait, they switched to Excel to add 2 numbers up. Maybe that's a feature I can move into my thing. Really understanding how you fit into that workflow will uncover much more value than the customer can articulate to you. And this goes also back to the strategy point of like really understanding what it is that you uniquely bring to the table. Because a customer might think that that's a really important feature, but it doesn't mean that it's important to every customer that you have. It doesn't mean that it's actually leveraging the technology or the opportunities that you have in your product and in your tech stack to do something even better, right? There could be an even better solution to that same problem. And again, that's kind of why we keep asking why, right? Like, why do you want that feature? Why is that important to you? Why do you think that would help? And another favorite product manager question is, what problem are you trying to solve, right? Is to really break it down to the problem point. And customers are not good at articulating this, right? That's just not their job. They're focused on doing their day-to-day job. They're focused on doing their day-to-day, you know, if it's a B2C app, they're focused on getting food on the table, or whatever that scenario is. They can't really articulate what it is that they need. It's only through good user research, through good data, understanding what our customers really could find valuable and where they're struggling and have problems today that we could solve for them. That's how you unlock it. So it's a fuzzy kind of way to answer the question, because we should be 100% influenced by our customers, but it's not by going and asking our customers what they want. And it's not by just doing what, you know, the most high-paying customer tells you they need. It's not a way to be successful as a company or as a product.
Mm-hmm. Okay, awesome. I think those are all the questions we had. Thank you so much, Martin. This has been such an insightful session. Like, I have so many notes, and I hope like everybody else has taken away a thing or two. I have a funny story. Martin has, unknown to him, been my product coach for many years now. And I remember the first time I saw him on stage, I attended the Minor Product Conference, and then he walked on stage with these blue sneakers. And bear in mind, like before then, I had only seen him on Medium and on the internet and all whatnot. And then he comes on stage and he says, oh, wow, like, this is crazy. Like, he feels like he's struggling with imposter syndrome because he can't believe that 1,500 plus product managers came from all over the world to listen to what he had to say. And I remember laughing my head off and thinking to myself, if Martin feels this way, then why do I second guess that means, yeah, we're all in this together. So yeah, I've adopted you as my product coach. I'm just putting it out there publicly, so you can't deny it.
Thank you, Khadija. That's amazing to hear. I love getting feedback like that, and I still feel imposter syndrome. I think it's something we as product people will always feel a little bit more than a lot of other people, because we're generalists, right? In a specialist world, as I said in that talk, like, we're working with engineers and designers and experts every single day, and we're the people that's supposed to know a little bit about everything and bring it all together. Of course, we're going to feel that, but it's important to realize when we're also adding value to that conversation and using those influencing skills that Josh talked about to help move that conversation, right?
Yeah, awesome.
Thank you so much for having me, Khadija. It's been a pleasure. I hope to be able to come to Lagos in person sometime soon when we can travel again, but you know, who knows when that will be.
Exactly. Someday. Thank you so much, everyone. Martin, do you want to share how people can connect with you if they want to?
Yeah, absolutely. Easiest, so you can find more information about the Decision Stack, and as I said, I'll make sure the slides are there by tomorrow, at least, at thedecisionstack.com. If you want to find me, I'm BFG Martin everywhere. So on Twitter, BFG Martin, And really on Slack or Twitter is probably the best way to find me anyway.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. I think we can let you go now. Thanks everyone for joining in. This was so great. Any parting words, Martin?
That's it. Thank you so much, Khadija. Thank you so much, Lagos and Nigeria. And I'm sure we had a few people from around the world since it was on YouTube, but it was a pleasure to speak to you. And thank you for the lovely feedback. If anyone has any feedback on the decision stack, how it's helped, how it's not helped, do let me know, because I want to keep developing the concept to achieve that clarity that we all want to achieve, right?
Exactly. Awesome. Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Thanks so much. Have a good night.
Bye.